welcome to today's CLA webinar, which is negotiating a lease you can live with. My name is Bob Neiman. I'm the editor of Planet Laundry Magazine, and I will serve as your moderator today. Each month, we like to take a topic that appeared in the magazine and focus on it in a webinar. Today's topic appeared in the September issue of Planet Laundry, and it's your chance to kind of take a little deeper dive into the whole topic of negotiating a laundromat lease. I'll begin by asking our panel some questions, and then we'll follow up at the end with some questions from you as we have time. So please, throughout the program, feel free to fire away with the questions. Type them into the question box on your screen and send them off to me. And again, we'll get to as many as we can throughout the hour here. So let's start by meeting our panel. We're lucky to have with us today Ross Dodds of Luxe Laundries. Ross, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Carl Heinrich of HK Laundry Equipment. Carl, the same. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Carl Kiefer, Laundry Services Company in the Chicago area. Carl, thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me as well.
As you can see, we have two Carls. So as we go through this, I'm just going to refer to Carl H and Carl K. I hope neither panelist is insulted by that, but I think that's the easiest way to keep it simple. And let me just go to Ross first and just avoid all that with the first question. Ross, in your experience, what elements of a lease are most important and why?
I mean, for laundromats, unlike some of the retails, like long term is really what is the beginning factor. I mean, when you're looking at financing $500,000+ in equipment these days, many bigger stores, even over $1 million, you have to have a long lease to be able to get your return on that. So we start with the long-term lease, and then you never know if you're going to want to stay in the business or if it's going to make sense to sell off to somebody else. So making sure that lease is assignable and your options are assignable at the same predetermined. You want everything laid out in the beginning, especially if you're on good terms with somebody. You never know if you end up on bad terms. So you want that document just laid out already.
Right. Good. What would you consider to be a long term?
So we try to get 10 to 15 in the first lease, and then an additional 2 to 3 5-year options. And I mean, I feel like when I started, it was very common to have a 10 and 2 5s, so you were at 20. And now in the last year or two, I'm seeing 25, even 30. And if a landlord will give it and wants to set the rate, take it.
Well, in your experience, have landlords been pretty open to those type of terms, or has that been kind of
a big mix?
Okay.
I think a lot of landlords, I think, have understood that laundromats have cemented their shopping center. I mean, we used to be the draw. Now, sometimes you'll definitely see if a fast food or a grocery store comes in, then they're going to be the anchor, not the laundromat. But in shopping plazas, especially here in Los Angeles, where they're a little bit smaller plazas, we're seeing that laundromats typically are still the anchor. And I would say 75% of landlords understand that, have gone through both the 2008 crash, the pandemic. Laundromats were good, we were paying, and so those people understand that they are better off maybe collecting a little bit less than the highest market rent available on that 1-year term to have a 20-year tenant. Now, every once in a while, through generational changes or whatnot, new owners will come in and see something different and want to change that. And I mean, they own the plaza; it's up to them. But
yeah, Right, right. Are there any other elements that kind of pop to mind other than, length and term?
I mean, I think laying out who is responsible for different things,
Mhm.
what we commonly see in my leases particularly is a white box. So if you didn't build the laundry and the landlord didn't build the laundry, they consider a white box what they're leasing you. And that's not a laundry. A white box is your bathroom, your door, and your lights. And you start running plumbing and electrical for a laundry, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're in $100,000+. So you need
Yeah.
to establish if those are your responsibility to make sure that your insurance is covering that in a total loss, because it will likely have to be redone.
Yeah.
HVAC systems are common. These days, we try to get the landlord to either put them in working order or install them. And then after that point, at lease signing, we then are responsible for them moving forward. So just
Mhm.
making sure you understand all aspects of the building and what makes your laundry work.
Right. Great. No, great points. Carl Heinrich, same question for you. What are the top elements that a laundromat owner should be looking to get into that lease, and why?
I agree everything that Ross said. I think that, I look at it much more on the initial side. So it's the initial rent, it's the total rent, so that's the base rent plus your triple net, which is, insurance and taxes and maintenance and any other components the landlord can throw in there.
Mhm.
And it's going to be escalations and it's going to be the term. Um, we typically here will go with a 10-year term initially. No one is going to finance for less than that. So
Mhm.
you have to go with at least a 10-year term, and we like to go with 2 or 3 5-year options. Um, some of the bigger shopping center owners, the Brixmores, and some of the other ones, they're they'll look at you and they may talk, but generally they're more reluctant to do that,
Mhm.
especially if you specify out the terms. And frankly, when you start to go with extensions, if the terms aren't specified, either CPA or a set amount, then it's kind of worthless. It's you can put some um, generic jargon in there at market rate, but then who's to say what's market rate? You're renegotiating again.
Right.
Terms do need to be specified and just really spelled out so that you as an owner can project going out 20 years, 30 years, and figure out exactly what you might be paying.
Mhm. Mhm.
So those are my big ones. Initially, what's involved? If there, you can get obviously any make-ready funds, then that's huge.
Mhm.
Um, Similar to like a signing bonus. Um, but really, it's going to be escalations, and it's going to be the term and the initial rate.
Okay, very good, very good. Carl Kiefer, do you have anything outside of what we've heard, or any other top elements that come to mind for you that you within your stores or maybe within your clients would like to you need them focusing on in that negotiation?
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I would add and maybe emphasize is um, TI money. Don't leave that on off the table. So what is that? Tenant improvement monies. Oftentimes, more
Mhm.
savvy landlords will contribute to the project because they do recognize that you're going to become a permanent resident, a permanent tenant in their plaza,
Yeah.
and so. But all things being relevant, so if you're going to negotiate, for example, a progressive lease, whereas maybe you get 6 months free rent on the front side, the landlord's going to work his money into the backside somehow. So you're paying for everything. So if he gives you $100,000 or more in tenant improvement funds, he's making it up on the backside. But sometimes that can be, depending on what the overall package looks like, that can be worthwhile where you can defer some of your costs and find the through the landlord. So that's probably the only thing else that I would add to that. Another thing too, in echoing this long-term lease, 10 years is what we usually do, try to do on site, with 5-year options thereafter. Making sure that you have the option. You have to be careful with some of these leases that the landlord will work into the lease, that they have the option, not the tenant necessarily. So you just have to be careful with the language on that. Yeah, if you can get deferred rents, or progressive rent where maybe you're only paying the taxes for the real estate, that being a pass-through expense for the landlord, that negotiating some delayed rents so that you're not getting hit with the full rent necessarily in the first year, just so you have the opportunity to build up your business on the front side. So that's probably, otherwise I agree with everything else that's been discussed so far.
Yeah, no, those are great points. Let me stay with you, Carl, and in talking about rent and negotiating rent and other financial terms of the lease, what's the most effective way to go about that?
Yeah, I think just emphasizing to the landlord that you are a permanent tenant, that you're not a nail salon that could be out of there in a year, or a restaurant that could be out of there in 2 years or less. Restaurant business, I've heard statistics that most restaurants fail, and that most restaurants fail in the first 2 years of business. So and whereas after we've invested all the money in infrastructure, construction costs, that kind of thing, we're not going away anytime soon. So I would give a special focus to the landlord to make sure that they realize the value that you're giving to the property. Also, when you're talking long-term leases, the landlord, when they sign a 10-year lease, they can go back to their bank, having that 10-year tenant, and having rent rolls guaranteed out for 10 years minimum. That adds value to the building. So again, placing focus with that landlord to that point, to the strength that you bring to the table, and not ignoring that. So we bring more to the table to that landlord, I think, than necessarily just being another tenant.
No, perfect. I get that. Ross, how about you as far as the negotiating the rent? Do you have any tips or strategies or things that have worked especially well for you with that type of negotiation?
I mean, certainly as we've grown, it's helped to be able to send them our current locations and be like, please go by, please take a look. We're going to invest heavily into your plaza, so it's going to be a win-win for both of us. And just one add on the leases, it's more common probably in the larger cities. We're seeing it a lot more here, is demolition clauses. Got to be very careful on those, where they can just end the lease. And I mean, usually you'll see them start at like $1,000 or something. It's like, I'm not picking up my toys in the playground and going down the street. I can't do that with laundry equipment. So you have to be very careful in the demolition clauses.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's something that could kind of sneak up on you and you may not realize. Absolutely. Okay. Carl Heinrich, same question as far as just, is there any type of strategies that you use or you maybe instruct your clients to use when negotiating their rents? Anything that's been effective for you?
What I try to do is I try to tell them that we are the bond in their property portfolio. Okay. We're not a high flyer. We aren't really exciting, but we're an essential business, and we're going to be there in year 1 through year 30 or 20, and we're just going to be that constant annuity that's going to be there. We're going to be the anchor to that center. And sure, you know, we show them other stores that we're doing. We show them, you know, a presentation or a mock-up of what we're planning to do with that store. And we're sharing with them some of the numbers we're dealing with. And many a times these guys are like, you know, it's eye-opening. And you know, once they start to get an idea and a handle of the scope of the work and the cost involved and the time that it takes to make it happen, if you can build that story and really stress that we're the bond in their property portfolio, then that usually softens them up a little bit. And, you know, it's like anything else. It's just a give and take, and, you know, you work on it. And, you know, I've seen, first, anything is negotiable. That's the beauty, okay? You know, you can negotiate, you know, $100 a month rent for the first 5 years and realize that you're going to get nailed on the back end. But, you know, as long as you've got two willing parties that are willing to work on this, then, you know, you're going to make a deal as long as the numbers make sense.
The bond in the portfolio, I like that. That's a great analogy, Carl. Yeah, I like that. Let me just remind everybody that we could please feel free to ask questions if you have anything. If you got a lease coming up, or if you're in the middle of a lease negotiation, now's the time to get your questions answered. So feel free to send those to me at any time during this program. Next one, Carl Kiefer. Let's talk about property maintenance and repairs, and how do you address that, and who's responsible, and how important is that as far as, you know, lease negotiation goes? Just that maintenance and
Of course,
stuff.
it's very important. Yeah, it's very important. And like what Carl Henrik had mentioned, everything's negotiable. So trying, as was mentioned earlier, to put the responsibility of the air conditioning units on the landlord. And the gamut, there's all kinds of, you know, it depends on the landlord you're talking with them, and how savvy they are, how big of a plaza it is. It seems like, to me anyways, bigger plazas, sometimes you have a little more leeway on some of these things than some of the smaller operators. Typically, in the Chicago area anyways, everything in within the four walls is the responsibility of the tenant. You can have it where the landlord will take care of ceiling tile and roof, those kind of things, but oftentimes that becomes a pass-through to the tenant. Blacktop, you know, the blacktop in the parking lot, that's typically proportionate to your space, depending on how much square footage you have, and that is a pass-through. But anything you try to negotiate to have the landlord take care of it. Ideally, if you can get a gross rent rather than a triple net rent, they can happen. Typically, I see those more often in a smaller plaza than in the larger plaza. But if you can get a gross rent, I have seen it where the landlord misses. In fact, I personally had a lease once where the water bill was on the landlord. So it became a part of the common area. So basically, all the other tenants, sadly, were helping me with my water bill situation. So, but if it doesn't come up, don't bring it up. So, so any kind of responsibility that you can leave on the landlord, obviously you want to do that if you can. But the other side again is, if the landlord sees that responsibility falling on himself, he's going to build in a buffer against that cost. One thing to be careful about on that is management fees. Landlords will sometimes attach management fees, so they'll fix anything, but they're going to hire their people at whatever cost that is. They're going to pass that cost to you, plus their 10%, plus their 15% management fee for those things. So, so again, another thing to be mindful of. But yeah, and try to get the landlord to take care of roof, air conditioner if you can. But again, everything as Carl H had said earlier, is negotiable here. So we try to get much responsibility onto the landlord. The value of bringing those responsibilities to you, now you have control over the cost, but the landlord's probably going to put in some kind of clause as far as inspections or responsibility or some oversight in whatever you take on yourself to make sure those things are done.
Right, right. No, great answer. I have a question from somebody, and this is for anyone on the panel then. And they're asking, can you share situations where you've run into disputes with the landlord and what terms of the lease could have helped avoid the dispute or have the dispute resolved favorably for the laundromat tenant? Have any of you run across that kind of situation? A dispute with a landlord?
Where with a landlord, where that
And
the
dispute, and
tenant
then
is the
what
beneficiary
terms?
in that dispute.
What terms of the lease could have helped avoid the dispute? Or have
Well, the
resolved it
landlord's going to
favorably?
typically put in the language in the lease. They're going to build language in the lease that all the language in the lease is to.
Oh, I think Carl's frozen.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think what Carl was going to say was that, you know, all the language in the lease is there to protect the landlord. You know, it's really kind of whoever writes the lease, and correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, whoever writes the lease is going to try to put their spin on it. So on some of the smaller landlords, the mom and pops, you know,
Right.
you can sit there and take the high road and say, oh, I can do this for you. And you lay it out to, you know, your benefits. But, you know, any small to large, you know, shopping centers are going to have well representation on that. Typically, the only dispute we've ever had was primarily lint coming from our dryer exhaust that then started to clog up other people's air conditioners. And, you know, we apologized, we got up there and we, you know, cleaned it off, but it then became an ongoing maintenance item for the center. And so we're paying our share of it, or the other way to look at it is all the other tenants were helping pay for our lint to be removed. So that's the only thing I can really think of, at least in my experience.
Right. Ross, how about you? Have you run into anything where a dispute and the lease could have been tweaked to fix that? Or
Our only issue has been where a next generation has taken over. But because we already had the lease and our extensions, we were protected. They didn't realize that the extensions were already set, and they were getting really excited about what they were going to do to us, and then they had to reread it and realize that there wasn't anything they could do. So that's just the importance of, if you get along really great with somebody. I see it in the forums a lot where it's like, oh, I love my landlord, I have a year left on my lease, so I don't need to renew it. And then all of a sudden either that landlord dies, retires, or just has a change of heart, and now they're moving their laundry or selling their equipment because they're out of their lease. You need to be addressing that far before you get to, I would say, before 5 years. You need to be addressing it. I mean, once you go below 10 years on the lease, if it can't be renewed, the price of your laundry and the value just starts to plummet. So it's very important to keep that going.
Yeah, absolutely. Russ, I'd like to stay with you on this next one, and it's just leveraging market research for this whole negotiation of leases. You know, how do you prepare for a lease negotiation? What should you be looking at? What should you be gathering? What should you be providing them to help your case? How do you do your due diligence for a lease negotiation?
I mean, hopefully you're dealing with I mean, it's different for existing versus you're going in to build from scratch, because you have to then probably convince this landlord why they want this laundromat, and um, how much it's going to cost to build out. I mean, we kind of have a head start when we're usually dealing with landlords that already know the laundromat and why they have liked it. So we're just showing them, if they've gotten into a situation where they're seeing their shopping center deteriorate because the laundromat has deteriorated, we're bringing them what we're going to bring back so that that doesn't happen again. And we turn this back around to how it started when they loved having a laundromat in their facility or in their shopping plaza. Outside of that, I mean, it's hard to compare to restaurant leases and whatnot. So we just tried to set that expectation that, I mean, if you're getting $50 a square foot on something over here for a 1-year lease, that's not going to be a 30-year lease. Like, and the value of having that 30-year lease or 20-year lease at a lower rate, that still ends up making a lot of sense for them.
Great, great. Carol Kiefer, same question. As far as just doing your homework, doing your due diligence to prepare for a successful negotiation. Any advice on that?
Yeah, I guess, and I think Ross handled most of what points
Okay.
I would have brought up, but knowing your market as it relates to laundromats, landlords will cite drive-by rates and that kind of thing. Well, what I always point out, this is a destination business, so your drive-by people is less important to me. Nobody's driving around with a load of laundry in their car and putting on the brakes and pulling in and doing their laundry on that moment.
Right.
Market analysis, I think, helps quite a bit, just to, if you're trying to build confidence in that particular landlord, and having done a market analysis of competitors in the marketplace to be able to demonstrate that to that landlord that this is a viable business, and that you have done your homework and that you're not just a fly-by-night business, that you're just going to pop in here and be out of business in a year or so. So I think doing proper market study and being able to present that to the landlord can be helpful if you're trying to substantiate again to the landlord and prove yourself to that particular landlord. But in our market, usually most landlords here are pretty hungry. So that's less critical these days, it seems like.
Great, thank you. Carl Heinrich, do you have anything to add to that as far as leveraging market research or data?
Yeah, you can always, if you have connections with a commercial broker, you can, again, try to get comps for similar space. For stuff that's currently being rented. You can use LoopNet and some of the other websites out there. But again, that's a starting point, as Ross basically said, and then you try to negotiate from there down. And but start at market value for what a similar space would be in a similar shopping center in a similar rough demographic. And then, because you want to be a long-term partner, and that's really what you are, even though you're a tenant, you're a partner. And that's again one of the selling techniques you try to do. You try to, instead of us versus them, it's us. We're together in this. And we're long-term business partners.
Perfect.
And
Great.
go from there.
Yeah. Carol, let me stay with you and just ask you, what are some common mistakes or I guess traps that laundry owners could fall into when it comes to leases and lease negotiation? What are the common mistakes that you've seen through the years?
Probably that they want to rush into the lease. They've fallen in love with the idea of a laundromat, and they want to get this thing going as quickly as possible.
Right.
I always joke about building the whole laundromat process is like giving birth. And so this is the romance. You know, you're beyond the romance. You're trying to get this thing to become a real entity. And so they just kind of look at this as a hurdle, and they just kind of want to rush through it. And if they probably would take a little bit more time, they can probably negotiate a better lease.
Mhm.
And you know, a side point of this is that if you think about it, you know, there are four major expenses in the laundromat. You know, there's labor, you know, with wash, dry, and fold. There is utilities, which is a straight percentage of your revenue. There's an equipment note, and then there's the rental. And of all of those, the rental is really the only negotiable component out there. Everything else is pretty formulaic. Either it's a straight number or it's a percentage. And so this is really, you know, the one thing that we can negotiate that will yield huge dividends and profits, not now, but for the life of the lease.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great stuff.
So,
Carl Kiefer, any traps to avoid? Any common traps that that folks out there should avoid stepping into?
Um,
Nope. All right, let's go to Ross. How about yourself? Any mistakes to really they should
I think
sidestep?
Carl hit it right. Like, this is your chance to you're kind of like dating. You're getting to
Mhm.
know each other, and it's a great time to also either bring in a broker or whoever you're working with, if you're not working with somebody, depending. For me, that's a great time for me to be operating through somebody that already knows me and trusts me, because um, you want to leave the emotions out of it, and it can either become very emotional that you want it,
Yeah.
and you'll just sign off on some things, like Carl said, to make it go fast, or you'll get emotional. And some of the times I'm like, did they hit their head this morning? What are they talking about? So it's better that I'm operating between somebody else, so that then they can go back to the landlord and change my wording. um, but yeah, somebody that does this every day, this is a time when it makes a lot of sense to pay somebody to help you.
Mhm. Great. Carl, we got your back. Carl Kiefer. Okay, we'll move on. Carl Heinrich. Give me a lease horror story. I'm sure you have hundreds of them, but anything you care to share?
you know, the typical one is that, you know, the landlord is in the shopping center with, you know, a small strip store, and so you put a laundromat in, you get a 10-year lease, and all he sees you doing is carrying out bags of quarters. And he just slaps himself and says, you know, this is the golden goose. And, you know, it's just something that just kind of eats at him, because, you know, the guy is running around and, you know, shows up for an hour a day or two, and then he's gone. And, you know, 2-3 times a week, he's taking these sacks of money out. And people just come there, and so he gets all excited, and before you know it, you know, you have a problem even talking to him about a negotiated lease. And then, you know, you're getting towards, you know, the last year, and he sits there and says, let me help you. Okay, the lease says I need a white envelope back again, a vanilla envelope. That means you taking out all the vents and sealing the roof. That means jackhammering a concrete slab, you know, out all the drains that are underground and just making it back to normal. He said, but I'll help you. And at 10 cents on the dollar, he'll buy your store. And at that point in time, you're kind of screwed. And the only thing you can do is just nod and, you know, just be wiser and smarter next time. But that happens all the time. And as Ross said, it's not unusual for, the guy that you've had a great relationship with, who may only be, in his 60s or 70s, get hit by a truck. And then you're dealing with either the widow or the kids, and their idea of fair is entirely different.
Mhm.
So it's, if it's not in writing, it's not there.
Right. The entire scenario could be flipped just like that.
Easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it happens all the time, and it's a shame.
Yeah. Absolutely. Carl Kiefer. Carl, are you back with us?
I hope so. Can you hear me okay now? Yeah, I apologize.
No problem. I was just asking you about some common mistakes, and I think you were starting to talk about some common mistakes that people should avoid with their leases.
Yeah, I was just echoing really much of what Carl H was saying as
Mhm.
well. Just get everything up front, make sure you hammer that lease out on the front side and get a solid position in the front side, really. The the other side, to add a little bit of something to what Carl said too, is that I have gone and helped people. So let's say that you're a tenant, you have a laundromat, it's an existing laundromat that has a existing lease, and you've failed to negotiate that new lease. Now you're trying to sell the store. What can happen, and I've helped people do this too, is now as the new buyer, you bypass that seller and just go right straight to the landlord and negotiate a lease as the new tenant. So now you're able to do what Carl H was talking about on the landlord side. You're
Mhm.
able to do that as the new tenant, that you bypass that seller. So, and I think it was Ross talking about earlier that if you don't have a lease, you don't have nothing to sell. So your valuation drops drastically.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. And let me stay with you, Carl. Do you have any lease horror stories to share? I had asked the other Carl and Ross, and so I just wanted to see if you had anything you could kick in there as far as a horror story.
Yeah, certainly. Most of my horror stories are involved with people who failed to negotiate their lease up front. So I had a guy that bought a laundromat that did not have a lease, and now he's say, "Can you help me?" And somehow he was able to secure that. He was literally on month-to-month terms, and so again, it's paramount to have the right lease. So the horror stories, like I said, that come to mind for me are people who just did not secure that lease on the front side. Landlord certainly came in, kicked out the tenant. Another tenant comes in, negotiated the lease underneath the current tenant, and certainly have witnessed that. So that's probably the extent of my horror stories.
Okay, thank you. Another question come in, and I'd like to get the panel's reaction to this. My property manager claims laundromats and restaurants typically pay higher rent than regular retail. Is this accurate? He is offering the same size space 2 doors down for less than my current rent and won't consider that rate for my renew. Comments on that? On that question or that remark?
Yeah, I had already typed that I disagree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's one of the challenges with the leases. If you either didn't have it negotiated correctly the first time, or maybe the market has drastically changed, but it's really hard to convince a landlord to go down when they're already receiving more. Like,
Right.
what do you mean go down?
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
don't think I mean, I think laundromats are usually cheaper than other retail
Mhm.
around here. But it's whatever's in the landlord's mind. So
Yeah. Right.
It's all perceived leverage, and
Okay.
who has the leverage in that discussion. and it doesn't matter what your neighbor is paying. If that landlord sees that, oh, you're not going to pick up your bat and ball and just move immediately. So he does have some leverage on you there. So, if you don't have, term left on your lease, then it doesn't matter what your neighbors are paying necessarily. I mean, certainly on the front side, you can use that leverage, but if you're already a tenant and you're already established, it's kind of difficult, I think, to negotiate after that.
Right, right. Anything else on that one that anyone wants to jump in on?
No, and I agree with both Ross and
Okay.
Carl. You know, they're kind of
Yeah.
spot on. It's really the mindset of the landlord, and you know, that's why you try to craft it early on with the early negotiations.
Yeah.
Right, right.
And maybe if you can't do anything on the actual lease price, maybe the plaza needs a little work, maybe your laundry needs a little work, so you can negotiate for you both to do a little work to rather you need new ACs or new windows or something. Maybe you just take your loss on getting the same lease rate is down the way and get them to pay for some other stuff because it's going to help you both out. Paint the building. The landlords never paint the buildings, I swear.
Right, right. It's a simple thing.
That actually is a good point, Ross, because you know many a times, you know, you could sit there and and negotiate an extension, and so maybe you keep the higher rent, but you keep it static for the next 5 years, and you know the next 5 years after that, then it starts to go up to where market rate is. But you know, like I said, everything's negotiable, and you just kind of have to think outside the box a little bit. It's not necessarily linear all the time, and you can many a times, you know, kind of come at this from different angles, and just put yourself in the landlord's shoes.
Yeah, it's finding what interests the landlord. I mean, oftentimes when we first start negotiating a new lease, we ask for them to install stuff, pay for stuff, and we also ask for free rent periods or whatever. And it's a good way for us to get them responding back, because some will be like, oh, cash is off the table. I'll do rent period, but I don't want to be out of pocket for anything. Rent is out of pocket for me, but a lot of landlords don't consider that out of pocket. So you just have to feel out. Some landlords will just be impossible on both ends, but usually somebody has one side or another that they like better. And then you can just know to start negotiating more towards that way that they're more keen to.
Very good, very good. We have another question in from someone who's interested in adding solar to their store, and they have. Has anyone here had any experience in wording a new lease to add solar as a TI? Is it worth it? They have a brand new roof, south facing. They're in California, and they'd like to look into solar. Any experience with that or thoughts on that?
I know one person out here in California that put solar on, and I think she finds it worth it, even though she doesn't own the building. It just depends on the rebates. I think it was just this past week at the CLA, somebody was at the Wash Dry Full conference, somebody was saying that they just did it. They own the building. I want to say it was $140,000 or $160,000, and the taxes and rebates on it paid for like 120 of it. I was like, whoa.
Wow.
And they haven't seen a bill since. It's only been a couple of months, I guess. But so you just have to check with your state and figure out rather the rebates are good enough, then sure.
And I guess their question was, how does that fit into the lease, and what section of the lease, or how do you word that to get that in there and get that past the landlord and get that okayed, I guess. I mean, how does, yeah.
I mean, for the landlord, it should be a
Mhm.
good for their building, but
Mhm.
I don't know.
Okay.
That would be a lawyer question for me.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
if,
Carl? Yeah.
no, real quick, I was just gonna mention one thing I heard in your question was they had a new roof. That's always a soft topic or a tough topic for many landlords. They don't want people touching their roofs because they have warranties and that kind of thing on the roofing material. So, but you do most improvements like that, you have to go gain most leases where you have to gain approval from the landlord to make a modification to the building,
Mhm.
especially if it's exterior to your four walls internally. So if that's going on the roof, which most, as far as I know, all the systems I'm aware of go on the roof. But I'm talking in generic terms because we're in the Midwest. There are some people with solar panels, but it's not as popular as probably California. But the one thing that I would be careful there, I would think, is the roof. It would be a sensitive topic for the just a heads up on that. But it would require landlord approval, I'm sure.
Right. Very good. No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you guys for that. Um, hey, last question here from me, and it's I'm gonna reach out to all of you on that. It's what's the best advice for just achieving a lease you can live with? And you've given me a lot of advice this afternoon. But Carl Kiefer, let me start with you. What's the best way to get that lease you can live with?
Um, long term, as we started off, the longer the term, the more value add to the landlord's property. So and plus that protects you if you should you go to sell, as we've talked before earlier here tonight, is that or today, is that if you don't have a lease, you don't have anything to sell.
Mhm.
So you need to protect your financing and the term that's related to your financing. So long term is paramount.
Mhm. Carl Heinrich, same question.
Yeah, really, again, at least the rents here in the New York, Connecticut area can just be astronomically crazy. And so it just needs to make economic sense. So initially, if you can get a lease that economically works, that has the space, that does everything that you're looking for, then you make sure you have a long-term lease and you just negotiate the best you can. And if you're not necessarily comfortable with that, as Ross says, just hire a professional. Every penny paid to him will be well worth it. And just, again, talk to your distributor, because anyone who's been around for over 5 or 10 years certainly has had to negotiate with leases or has helped people negotiate. And, there are all sorts of stupid little clauses that just, end up in the minutia. Carl was, the side point here, and I don't mean to get distracted, but Carl Kiefer was talking about penetrations through the roof. And how do you deal with that, especially if the landlord just put on a brand new roof? You want to put 25 holes in this roof, plus makeup air, and he's getting twitchy, and you go, we're going to use we're going to use your contractor, we're going to use your roofer. So the bond and the guarantee stay in effect. And that usually resolves it. It's a little bit more money than somebody that you might find off the street, but it usually works well. So really, it's how do you get a good lease to live with? You start with a good solid economics. You get as long a term as possible. You get it specified, and you go from there.
Perfect. I love that. Ross, I started with you, and I'm gonna give you the last word. What's your best advice that you could share?
Well, I mean, I think we've talked about long leases because you're buying equipment and you need a long lease for the equipment loan. What we forgot is that all the banks have a form that they need signed that basically gives them access if you stop paying, and landlords have to sign off on it. Somebody can help me with the name of that form, but get that signed at the same time you're doing your lease. Don't try to go back later and say, oh, now I'm getting equipment loan and I need you to sign off on this. Sometimes it can get really, really tricky after the fact. And so I think if you feel like you won some and lost some on the lease negotiations, then most likely your landlord feels the same way. You're probably in a pretty good place.
Great. Wow, great information, you guys. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time. There's just a couple things I want to share, some upcoming CLA events that I'd like to share with you as before we wrap up here. If I can share my screen. Let's see. There we go. So we do have some upcoming virtual events next month. The next Planet Laundry webinar will be Tech Talk, how today's technology is transforming tomorrow's laundry industry. That's on October 17th. On the 23rd, the Women's Laundry Network is having a coffee power hour with the topic of changing habits. There's more information at coinlaundry.org on those two events. There's some Connect Live events happening throughout the rest of the year. Denver on October 24th, in Atlanta on November 21st, and in Newark, California on December 5th. It's a chance to get together with your peers, have a meal, and just talk shop and share what's working and maybe what isn't working for your businesses. Lastly, if you haven't been to the CLA Facebook group, please do that. It's Laundromat Professionals Network. It's a great chance to, again, talk to people who are doing it. They're in the trenches, maybe shorten your learning curve a little bit, but there's a lot of great conversations happening on Facebook at the Laundromat Professionals Network. And that's all we have time for. Again, I really want to thank our panelists, Ross, Carl, and Carl. Guys, thank you so much. It was great information, and I know you took time out of your busy schedule, so much appreciated. Thank you for being here, for participating. I hope you learned something that you can take to your next negotiation, and have a great rest of your day. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Bye-bye.